Perfect. All right, well, thank you guys. We are just about at the last session for the day, at least during this time. So this panel session is Integrating Science, Data, and Knowledges. I'm your moderator, Cynthia Naha. I'm the ad hoc chair for the New Mexico Tribal Resiliency Action Network and currently serve as the environmental director for Picuris, Pueblo. So on our panel today, we do have Sharon Hausam. She works with the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, and she'll be going over Indigenous data sovereignty. We also have Dennis Dye from the Southwest Polytechnic Institute, and he'll be talking about a sovereign digital network system for environmental monitoring on tribal lands. And then we have Phleger, who is from UNM, and he'll be talking about the Southwest Tribal Adaptation Menu. So some of you that have been curious, here's your time to listen to Addie. And then we have Nina Fontana from UC Davis, and they are all gonna self-introduce themselves. Sharon, take it away.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yes, now I can tell it's working. Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for still being here. I'm Sharon Hausam. I am the Climate Adaptation Planner and Research Scientist for the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. It's a fairly new position on the adaptation planning side. I want to thank the organizers for having me here on the panel today. I also want to acknowledge the Southern Tiwa Pueblo people whose traditional land this is, and the 19 Pueblos of New Mexico who currently hold this land. If you've had a chance to check out the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, you may have noticed this was formerly the Albuquerque Indian School, and it's now held in trust for the Pueblos of New Mexico. So we usually say that you are on Indian land, meaning ancestral, but this actually is currently Indian land also. So I am going to provide an overview of data sovereignty and some of the principles that are associated with it. And I also just want to acknowledge this, I'm referring to work done by others. This isn't my research per se. And especially active in this work is Stephanie Carroll Russo, who is Atna. She works at the University of Arizona. Also Dominique David Chavez, who is multicultural Indigenous Caribbean and is at Colorado State. Kyle White, who's citizen Potawatomi and at University of Michigan, and Linda Tuhiwai Smith, who's Maori from Aotearoa, and also Preston Hardison, who is recently retired from the Tulalip tribes, are all doing work in this area. And I have references at the end of the presentation. So I like to get a sense of broader meanings for terms, so I checked on how people broadly define data sovereignty. And in the corporate world, which is where a lot of the broader meanings show up, it means that data are subject to the laws and governance structures of the nation where they're collected. And in our context, what this means is that the data and knowledge are subject to the laws and governance structures of the indigenous nations who hold those knowledges, or the sources of those knowledge, and the context of the land where the knowledge is used. Indigenous data sovereignty means that indigenous people control how they create, use, share, and store the information with people who have legitimate and appropriate needs to use that data. Talking about data sovereignty also includes recognizing and respecting the history and the current challenges that indigenous peoples have faced and still face in their own communities regarding their knowledges. And it's often been difficult to maintain knowledges in the community because of rapid cultural change due to settler colonial practices. For example, when an indigenous group is relocated or its religious practices are made illegal, speaking the indigenous language is punished, disease takes the lives of elders before they can pass on the knowledge, or children have been taken from the community and relocated to boarding schools. We also need to recognize the long histories of exploitation of indigenous peoples and the more than human world that they steward. In the dominant society, we tend to view knowledge as serving the larger society as a public good. But those benefits can also expose the indigenous people and the rest of the environment to great risk. And knowledge can be distorted or misrepresented, used as a money-making tool through cultural appropriation. And there are also questions about whether knowledge is meaningful out of context. There are few overall protections for indigenous knowledges. In the United States, information that is gathered using federal funding is subject to the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. And research that's done through universities and other institutions has to get approval through institutional review boards, or IRBs, and they may require ways to protect that information, but it's still typically subject to FOIA. And even in tribal IRBs, which there are also IRBs that are set up by tribes, may not be able to require protection of their knowledge if there's federal funding involved. And that doesn't respect how indigenous people steward their knowledge. So that frames problems, and I'm not going to end on a depressing note, because I particularly appreciate Anne-Marie Chischili's optimism and her framing of climate hope. It's always great to hear from her, as we did yesterday. And there's hope because good work is being done on data sovereignty, and there are frameworks that we can start to live within more effectively in our work on climate change and other work that we do. One of the key principles of data sovereignty is free, prior, and informed consent, which is a phrase that's found in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And free refers to not being coerced, intimidated, or having any force. So the decision that the indigenous peoples are making about sharing knowledge is legitimate. Prior means at the beginning of the process, as it's in early design stages, not reaching out to indigenous peoples at the end and saying, oh, is this okay? Informed refers to being transparent about all the benefits and the costs. And consent, of course, refers to indigenous peoples having the right to say no to any research or to any other project. There are efforts to educate on appropriate principles for data management and control, and one of the previous speakers mentioned the FAIR principles for data, which fit with Western science, and they call for data to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and he was particularly referring to interoperability. But for indigenous communities, and ideally others as well, we also need to use the CARE principles: collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. Collective benefit means that the data needs to benefit indigenous communities in their own governance, equity, and their own innovations in their work. Authority means they have control over the collection and storage of the data with indigenous designed and approved protocols. And responsibility refers to researcher accountability and reciprocity to support additional work in indigenous communities, including promoting data literacy where that is something that the community would like. And ethics addresses the imbalances in power. So focusing closely on the benefits to indigenous communities, more specifically than society as a whole, and a public benefit is really essential. And that starts with the research question. And ideally, the question would be asked by the indigenous community, and if they needed assistance, they would find researchers in that topic area to help design the research methods, conduct the research, analyze the data, and help report on the results. The idea of doing research based explicitly on community needs, possibly just one community, has been around a while. This is not something new. Participatory action research is a term that's been used for a while to describe this community-engaged research. What we talk about a lot in climate research is the co-production of the science and of the knowledge. It's also really important to have people involved in this who can work in both philosophical worlds. There are definitely differences between Western science and indigenous knowledges. That's a different presentation. But indigenous students who are also being trained in Western science often can cross back and forth in these conversations, but that also can put a heavy burden on them, and that was something else that I appreciated Anne-Marie Chischili really bringing up yesterday, is the need for people to to take care of themselves in that process. And you know, we thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm looking forward to hearing from emerging leaders also tonight. With that, I probably have gone just slightly over my 5 minutes, and I'll turn it over to Dennis. Thank you.
Ocio. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dennis Dye. I'm an enrolled member of Cherokee Nation, and I'm a faculty member at the Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute here in Albuquerque, where I lead the Geospatial Information Technology program. So I'm very pleased that Sharon spoke before me, because she really laid the foundation for what I'll be talking about in terms of what is data sovereignty, why is it important for tribes, for tribal nations, and for those who tribes partner with when it comes to research, data, and information that has special significance for tribes. So what I'll be talking about here briefly is a project that has been funded by the National Science Foundation to develop and demonstrate what we are referring to as a sovereign digital network system for environmental monitoring on tribal lands. This is a partnership of SIPI, of Navajo Technical University, and UCAR up in Boulder, Colorado. And that's the National Center for Atmospheric Research and the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. So again, NSF has funded us to demonstrate this sovereign network that's really intended and designed to be a very practical tool that tribes can use to facilitate and to protect their interests with regard to data sovereignty. A very practical tool for data sovereignty, and equally important, data governance, how they manage their sovereign data. Our project is focusing specifically on environmental monitoring, that is data from environmental sensors. But I want to emphasize that the system is truly data agnostic. Any kinds of data that's of importance to the tribe can be incorporated into this sovereign network system, but it's designed to provide local control for data sharing. That is, data sent out from the tribe, as well as data that's brought in to the tribe, but also to provide a vehicle, a platform for transferring this technology to the tribes, but also, very importantly, to facilitate education of our tribal youth, and particularly at our tribal colleges. So this is the background of our project, but at the core of this network is a software system, very unique, a very special software system that's called Ramada. This is a server system developed at the Unidata program up at UCAR, repository for archiving and managing diverse data. Now, why are we using this? Well, it's been demonstrated to be particularly effective, reliable for managing massive volumes of data, transferring in and out, controlling the access, controlling the destination of data coming in and out of a local node on an extensive network. It's really designed for data management, for visualization. It's open source. It's very simple to install and use. But again, it provides a powerful tool for local control of data sharing and receiving. But one example of how it's already being utilized with really far-reaching benefits for tribes is we are collaborating, the Navajo Nation, NTU on the Navajo Nation is collaborating directly with UCAR and NCAR to develop a customized downscaled weather prediction product that will be delivered in near real time to the Navajo and Hopi nations. This is a first. It's never been done before. It's going to be a higher quality, we believe, product that's going to, we think, is going to be very instrumental in supporting the local information needs for Navajo and Hopi ranchers and farmers. Also, I want to point out that weather prediction model is also catalyzing interest, at least on the part of the Navajo Nation, to establish a meteorological agency and bring in and have homegrown meteorological expertise to support the tribe. So finally, just an example of how we're developing this at the demonstration stage. We are establishing at NTU at Crown Point, New Mexico, and here at SIPI in Albuquerque, very high scientific quality weather stations for a demonstration of how this kind of system can work. A whole array of environmental monitoring variables of interest to our local communities, demonstrating data sharing via this sovereign network, supporting our STEM education, precision agriculture, all of which we will incorporate into an emerging extension program at SIPI as a way of extending this experience, this information, to our local communities, the Pueblos, as well as tribes across the country. And we will be extending and expanding this network through a follow-up project to be funded, hopefully funded by NSF, that's going to provide opportunities for other tribal colleges to join us in partnership with their local tribes and provide at each TCU local expertise to facilitate tribes in implementing, if they so desire, if it's of interest and value to them, this type of sovereign data network that we believe will really provide the platform that's necessary for tribes to have the confidence that they can protect their data interests as they face what's really a growing increase, a ramping up of partner invitations to collect data on tribal lands. So pay attention going forward. If there's interest in this, in participation, please reach out to me. My email address is right there on the slide. Wado, thank you.
Is this working? Sweet. So at the risk of giving off a youth pastor vibe, I'm going to speak down here. I tend to move my hands a lot when I get excited, and I'm really excited about this project, so I don't want to hurt any of my co-panelists here. This project, so I'm going to preface this with, this is really, rather than sort of a presentation on work that's been done, this is really an invitation to participate in an ongoing process that is right at the beginning, still in the scoping phase. It has a lot of flexibility and sort of room for input. And so I'm really hoping that everyone who feels compelled to will take advantage of this opportunity to participate. And as you may have heard repeated a number of times throughout the thing, we are having something on Thursday at the UNM Rotunda, and if you don't already have the information for that, please feel free to reach out to me about it. So this project, the Southwest Tribal Climate Adaptation Menu, I feel really humbled to be the spokesperson for this. This is the brainchild of the New Mexico Tribal Resiliency Action Network, which is an incredible sort of ad hoc organization that has been working in the state for a long time. Most if not all of our members are here, and actually I'd love to sort of get people's hands up just to, Sharon, Cynthia, Ariel, Thelma, Margaret is here as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Maxine, our alumna, Sarah. But so there's a really great group of people working on this, and I want to take no credit for sort of this process. I'm just sort of here to kind of tell you what we're doing and why to some extent. There's a lot of ways that we can sort of frame this effort. This is a way to coordinate efforts. This is a way to sort of provide the real, actual, on-the-ground applications of sort of adaptation strategies that Mr. Chavez mentioned. But I'm going to frame it in the terms of sort of climate hope, because that seems to be one of the themes emerging from this. I am a baby in this field. You know, I was given the opportunity to be the New Mexico Tribal liaison for the South Central CASC a number of years ago. I'm now at law school and sort of continuing to do adaptation work. But even in that time, I've seen an enormous explosion of resources and case studies, and like it's really it gives you goosebumps just talking about it. You know, like stuff is happening even in this very narrow window that I've sort of been able to glimpse this field. This graph is from the National Climate Assessment. But so one of the sort of questions, it doesn't convey exactly what I wanted to convey, so I'll tell you what I wanted to convey. But essentially, it's just that there's so many people doing such good things, and particularly sort of in a tribal context. You know, we have all of these planning efforts. We have stuff that's happening outside the context of planning, you know, that isn't coded as adaptation, but is still sort of, you know, perpetuated resilience. And one of the sort of ways that you can view an entry point for the Southwest Tribal Climate Adaptation Menu is how do we build on each other's efforts? You know, how when a new community is entering this arena, can they sort of have an accelerated process and benefit from all of the work that so many people have been doing for such a long time? And so, I loved Lauren's example. I'm so pleased that Lauren spoke earlier, because a lot of this work was actually inspired by the tribal climate adaptation menu effort that occurred up in the Great Lakes region, and that was a really interesting process, and sort of I think an example of sort of, you know, how this can be sort of a messy process in a good way. Essentially, the workbook was presented to I believe the College of Menominee Nation, Gliffwick, Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, and others, and they said, you know, this is great, but it's not culturally relevant. You know, there's all of the way that you're describing so many of these strategies is in a way that doesn't comport with sort of our culture and values and language, and so they sort of engaged in this process that felt very much like sort of the hard work that people have been talking about, where apparently they refer to themselves as the TAM fam now, which I love, and apparently their meetings involve lots of crying and, you know, like this sort of very sort of open process of communication, where essentially they took I'm going to go back to that, but they took a lot of the strategies that NIACS had come up with, and they sort of you know, to get to the point of this particular session. They integrated sort of that information into this very specific cultural context of Menominee and Ojibwe culture and language. And so this is one of my favorite examples is down here. Oh, whoops. Didn't mean to break everything. Yeah. I gotta repress myself a little bit here. But so basically, like the you know, dealing with invasive species became maintain or improve the ability of communities to balance the effects of non-local beings. And so essentially, what we're creating here is a tool to facilitate climate adaptation planning process. Because there is sort of such broad efforts happening across the Southwest, we're trying to sort of essentially collect all of the real world on the ground responses to climate impacts and provide a resource that can be used by communities to sort of get directly to implementation, sort of integrate with the larger sort of network of information that's going around right now. And this is a much worse version of Lauren's filter model. But so essentially, you know, in the context of sort of integration here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to collect all these resources, case studies, collaborations, partnerships, that sort of thing, filter it, kind of create a framework to filter all of that, and then produce actual options that people can use. And so I'll just wrap up by saying one of the really important pieces of work that we're doing, I think, is to right now we're in phase 1. And we're gathering all those resources that are sort of coming in the top end of the funnel. We're making some really important key choices about sort of what kind of geographies we're going to cover, how we're going to interact with different communities. We're thinking that largely we're going to sort of have maybe two products where essentially one is a framework for sort of how a community or a cultural group would essentially take all these resources and translate them into sort of an actionable menu, and then actually demonstrate how to do that for Pueblo communities here in New Mexico. That's still open, we're still in sort of the scoping phase. But I really want to sort of invite and solicit everybody here to get connected with us, get connected with Cynthia, with myself, and if you're available, please come on Thursday to our meeting at the UNM Rotunda. That's all. And I would love if you corrected me in whatever ways you think were appropriate.
That was only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Fontana. I'm a postdoc with the Southwest CASC and at UC Davis. And my focus in my postdoc is on cultural fire, but today I'm going to take you on a journey, a little bit of a story as well, surrounding my PhD research. Just kidding. Okay, so this is a little bit tough for me to talk about because it's very close to my heart. The place that we're going to go to is Ukraine, and more specifically to the western part. And there is a mountain range called the Carpathian Mountains. It's the second largest tract of forest. 60% of the primeval forest that we have left is there, so we're talking oak, beech, pine, and we're going to kind of zoom in a little bit more, and you can see sort of that shape. That's the Carpathian Mountains. It spans a number of countries, and then you'll see sort of a darkened region, hopefully, and that is Hutzulshtina, which is the land of the Hutzels. And you can see it kind of goes into Romania. So it borders both Ukraine and Romania. And then it kind of zooms out and you'll see these little dots. And those dots are villages that I spent a few years in. And what's really unique is the cultural center is Verkhovina, which we know that colonists like to rename things. But its real name is Žabje. And it's a very important cultural center, and so thinking about radiating and looking at those villages around that was really important. So this is sort of what it looks like to be in one of the forests. It's a favorite memory of mine, and you can see there's a lot of mushrooms. 16 million people rely on these forests and meadows and all of these really important ecosystems. And so I wanted to I'm trying to portray sort of the beautiful parts of this country, because I know the news you're seeing other parts of it, unfortunately, right now. So the land of the Hutzels is an ancient land, over 2,000 years. This particular area was a sanctuary, and there were cultural fires there for sure. Now there are, kids go there and they hang out, but there are petroglyphs, and it's sort of like one of the origin stories of this place. It's called Pisani Kamin, which means painted rock. And so the Hutzels from this point really sort of expanded, and they're called traditional highlanders. They maintain pastoral meadows, which kind of look like this. And so you'll see there's integration of people, place, organisms. And so I spent 2016 and 2019 there. And when I was thinking about my research, I really wanted to focus on more about the how and the why, more than the what. So how we do research and why we do research is just as important as what we're seeking. And it kind of relates to those principles that we talked about earlier with Sharon's presentation and Dennis and Addie. That's really central to the work that we do, I think. And so my research question was, how does TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, support Hutzul communities? So looking at relationship to landscape, community health, and how it maintains food sovereignty. So there's a lot of gathering of culturally important species for medicine, for food. All the communities there are nourished by their environment. So there's subsistence, there's fishing, there's beekeeping. There's amazing gardens that I can't even begin to describe how green and beautiful they are. There's intergenerational knowledge. There's tons of different mushrooms that people collect. Your hands, you can see sort of like the pigment of bilberries and whortleberries and lingonberries. So, and they gather and they sell them, right? So it's a very much of a connected place. And as we all do research, there are plot twists in our research, hopefully. And so as I was going out and gathering with folks, interviewing, a lot of ethnobotanical knowledge, of course, questions came up related to climate change, related to change in general. And the quote that came up among a lot of the elders, I gathered over 70 interviews, was, food is medicine, which we all know food is medicine. But where they were gathering was being impacted by ecosystem changes like illegal logging and pollution, by climatic changes, flooding and elevation shifts of species, by cultural changes, commercial harvesting, and legacy of colonial logging. So as I was going out and talking to folks, these questions came up. And so I had to think about, well, these are really important questions and really important ideas that I need to make central to this research. I need to center these voices and these choices. And so I wanted to share with you 2 examples. So one was the development, we just called it the Girls, but the formal name is the Women's Library Collective. But it really came about organically. You go out and meet people, and then an idea comes up, which was a phenological calendar for the community. So phenology is sort of like nature's clock, right? It determines and looks at, how organisms are shifting or the timing of something. And so with all these changes, it became apparent that maybe that needs to be created for the community. So it's in their language, it's in Hutzul and Ukrainian. A couple of these women, Luba's an artist, so it has Hutzul art on it. And it's not designed for anyone else. It's not published, it's theirs. And it really was organic. I couldn't have planned it, and if I tried to plan it, it surely would have failed. So that was definitely something that came about pretty organically. The second example is a little bit different. I had the opportunity to work in parks and universities with Hutzul scientists, with Hutzul professors, and we finally, jointly, got a paper accepted. And this is a big deal, just because English is not their first language, and it took about 1.5 years of constant, calling them up and saying, okay, this is what I think we should write about this. Is this portraying the worldview that is accurate? Because things get lost in translation. So this is something that I think is really important in the different levels of engagement, whether it's collegial, where you're supporting community members, or whether it's more Indigenous, which is really the Indigenous worldview. So those are the two examples on sort of centering voices and choices, and just two simple examples. Not so simple, they took a lot of work, but in how we can think about data, sovereignty, and our research.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Addie, Sharon, and Dennis. We do appreciate the time you took, as well as all of you for sticking it out to the end. It is now 5:03, so y'all are troopers. Give yourself a round of applause.